Hello and welcome to Creepy Crime Cases. Before we begin, if you appreciate deep dives into true crime stories like this one, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Today we will be covering a case that spun out of Australia. How a young and vibrant young woman was raped, murdered and buried in a shallow grave by a monster in human form. Thank you for your time. I will see you at the end. It was supposed to be a short walk a young beautiful woman had made 100 times before. Just half a mile from a lively bar to her apartment in a trendy Melbourne suburb. But on this faithful night, in the early hours of September 22, 2012, 29-year-old Jill Meagher never made it home. Gillian McKeon was born on October 30, 1982, in Drogheda, Ireland. She spent her early childhood in the quaint village of Termonfeckin, a place known for its strong sense of community, which likely influenced her warm and outgoing nature. Her story took an international turn when her father, George McKeon, accepted a job on the other side of the world in Perth, Australia. The family moved, giving Jill a unique childhood divided between her Irish roots and the classic Australian sunshine. In Perth, she attended Bull Creek Primary School and later Rossmoyne High School, where she made friends and adjusted to a new culture while living a life that seemed very happy. This Australian chapter lasted for several years, but in 1996, the family moved back to Ireland and settled in Drogheda. Jill completed her schooling there, after which she studied at the prestigious University College in Dublin, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts degree. After graduating, she got a job at an Ireland broadcasting company. This showed that her career was already progressing in media, a path she would continue in Australia. But her time at UCD was more than just academics. It was there, in 2008, that she met Tom Meagher. Their connection was immediate and deep. They fell in love, and it wasn't long before they decided to marry. They tied the knot that same year, a couple full of plans and dreams for their future. One of those dreams was to return to Australia, the country Jill had known in her childhood. So in 2009, they took a big leap of faith. They moved to Melbourne, a city known for its arts, culture, and energy, a perfect fit for someone like Jill. She quickly found work at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, where she started in an administrative role, but her talent and personality stood out, leading her to occasional on-air work for ABC Radio Melbourne. Her colleagues quickly grew to love her. They described her as larger than life, which is a powerful phrase. It means she had a strong presence. She was incredibly funny, with a sharp, witty sense of humor that could instantly turn a frowning face to a smiling one. She was intelligent and engaging, the kind of person who made great company. She loved fun, socializing, and being around people. She stayed in close contact with her parents and brother, Michael. In September 2012, she had just returned to Melbourne after visiting her family and checking on her dad. Her life was, by all accounts, in a good place. She had a loving marriage, a fulfilling career, a close family, and a wide circle of friends. The night of Friday, September 21, 2012, began like any other Friday for a young, social couple in Melbourne. Jill Meagher had finished her workweek at the ABC and went out with her colleagues to celebrate a friend's birthday. There was nothing unusual about this. It was a normal way to unwind and connect with co-workers outside the office. The group first went to the Brunswick Green, a popular bar at 313 Sydney Road in Brunswick. This area is known as a lively hub where students, artists, and young professionals gather. The evening continued for hours. Then, around 1 a.m., as some began to wind down, Jill and one female co-worker decided to move on to another place for a final drink, a nightcap. They went to Bar Etiquette, located just a short walk south on Sydney Road. At some point while she was at Bar Etiquette, Jill took out her phone and texted her husband, Tom. She asked if he wanted to join them. It was a simple, affectionate gesture to check in and see if he wanted to be part of the fun. But Tom, tired from the week, had already fallen asleep on the couch at home. He didn't hear the text message come through. His phone remained silent, and he stayed asleep, completely unaware that this missed connection would soon bring immense pain. Finally, at about 1:30 a.m., Jill and her coworker decided it was time to head home. They left bar etiquette and stepped onto Sydney Road. The coworker, being a good friend, offered to share a taxi with Jill and drop her off at her door. But Jill declined. Her apartment on Hope Street was only half a mile away. To put that in perspective, it's about a 10 to 12-minute walk. The area, while quieter than a few hours earlier, still felt familiar and safe. So, the two women said their goodbyes on the sidewalk and parted ways. This was the last time anyone who knew Jill would see her again. What we know about her next movements comes from CCTV footage. At about 1:36 a.m., a camera at Crust Pizza captured Jill walking north along Sydney Road. She walked at a steady, purposeful pace, wearing the high-heeled boots she loved. As she continued, the character of Sydney Road began to change. The dense cluster of open bars and bright lights of the commercial strip faded behind her. The buildings became a mix of closed shops and residential apartments. The foot traffic, which had been steady just blocks earlier, now significantly diminished. The light between the streetlights grew darker. At this point, another figure entered the narrative. Unknown to Jill, a man in a blue hooded sweatshirt was also on Sydney Road. His movements, as analyzed later by police from CCTV, were not those of an ordinary pedestrian. He was recorded looping back after noticing her. At one point, he was seen breaking into a slight run to close the distance between them. His path was intentionally intersecting hers. Crucial footage comes from a camera inside the Duchess Boutique, a bridal shop. At 1:41 a.m., the man in the blue hoodie stood outside the shop. Moments later, Jill Meagher walked into the frame. She stopped and an interaction took place. The footage shows her gesturing with her mobile phone. This interaction lasted about a minute. The final image of Jill Meagher alive was time-stamped at 1:42 a.m. Then, at approximately 1:43 a.m., her phone records show she made a call to her brother, Michael, in Perth, Western Australia. The call lasted 53 seconds. They spoke about their father, George, who was recovering from a recent stroke. It was a brief, caring family check-in. Michael later told police he heard male voices in the background during the call. Inside their apartment on Hope Street, Jill's husband woke up on the couch as the room was dark and the silence of early morning felt heavy and strange. He had fallen asleep while waiting for Jill to come home. As he became fully awake, his first instinct was to check for her. He looked around the room, but the apartment was still and quiet. A nagging concern made him reach for his phone. The time was just after 2 a.m. He noticed he had a missed text from Jill. Guilt hit him for having slept through it, but then a more pressing thought emerged. If she was texting him at that hour, she must have been on her way home long ago. He called her mobile phone. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. He told himself not to worry. Maybe her phone had died, or maybe she decided to sleep over at a friend's and didn't want to wake him. But deep down, he knew something was off. He sent her a text, but there was no response. The minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. The quiet of the apartment grew oppressive. He tried calling again and again. Each time, he got the same result, the ringing tone that eventually led to nothing. By 3 a.m., his mild concern had turned into a tight knot of anxiety in his stomach. The reasonable explanations were running out. He began pacing, looking out the window at the dark street, hoping to see her approaching, but he saw nothing. He tried to suppress the rising panic, but it was becoming harder to ignore. By 4 a.m., worry took over completely. This wasn't just about a dead phone or a changed plan. Something was wrong. He knew it with chilling certainty. He couldn't just sit there waiting. He had to do something. He put on a jacket and left the apartment, stepping out into the cool, early morning air of Brunswick. The streets were nearly empty now, the night's revelers long gone. The silence broke only with the occasional distant car. He started walking the route he thought Jill would have taken. He scanned the sidewalks, doorways, and laneways for any sign of her. He called her name, his voice small and desperate in the vast quiet of the sleeping suburb, but there was no answer. He walked up and down the surrounding streets, hope fading with every step. The world felt incredibly large and threatening, and Jill was nowhere in it. Defeated and terrified, he returned to the empty apartment at around 6 a.m. The sun was starting to brighten the sky, but it brought no comfort. The time for waiting was over. He picked up the phone and called Victoria Police and reported his wife missing. As Saturday morning wore on, Tom began reaching out to everyone he could think of. He called and texted Jill's friends and co-workers from the night before, trying to piece together her moves, but the answers were all the same. Everyone last saw her when they separated on Sydney Road. No one had heard from her since. Word began to spread through their circle of friends and the ABC offices. A deep unease settled over everyone who knew her. By Sunday, September 23rd, concern spread beyond their immediate circle. A Facebook page titled, "Help Us Find Jill Meagher," was created. Her picture was shared thousands of times. People who had never met her shared the post, their own hearts reaching out to this missing woman and her frantic husband. The page quickly gained over 100,000 likes. It became a central hub for information and support. Volunteers organized search parties. Flyers with Jill's face were printed and posted on every pole and shop window in Brunswick and nearby suburbs. The community came together to search, refusing to let her disappear without a trace. A small press conference occurred that day, with Tom and Jill's family appealing directly to the public for any leads. The feeling shifted from worry to a city holding its breath, hoping for a safe return while quietly fearing the worst. The official police investigation, now a full-blown missing persons case, ran on two tracks: traditional ground searches and increasingly important digital and forensic evidence. The discovery of Jill's purse on Monday, September 24th, was a significant breakthrough, but it came with an odd and frustrating twist. The purse was found in a laneway off Hope Street, very close to her home. A local resident had found it over the weekend and taken it home, only realizing the terrible importance of what they had after seeing the escalating news reports and missing person flyers everywhere. This person then returned the bag to the spot where they found it and called the police. For investigators, this was a double-edged sword. On one hand, they now had Jill's belongings, her wallet, personal items, and crucially, her ABC identification card with her name and photo. This confirmed she had gotten very close to her apartment and that something had happened in that final, short stretch. On the other hand, the fact that the bag had been moved and then returned meant the crime scene, if the laneway could be called that, had been disrupted. The original placement of the bag might have provided clues about a struggle or the direction an attacker fled. That potential evidence was now lost. Because of this discovery and the high likelihood of foul play, the Victoria Police Homicide Squad took over the investigation from the local missing persons unit. The focus shifted to technology. Sydney Road, like many commercial strips in a big city, was lined with security cameras. Businesses used them for safety, and now they became the investigation's most valuable witness. Detectives began the painstaking process of visiting every business along Jill's suspected route, asking for any and all footage from that Friday night into Saturday morning. Shortly after, they hit the jackpot. An employee at the Duchess Boutique, a bridal shop on Sydney Road, provided the footage that would change everything. The camera was mounted inside the shop, looking out through the front windows, giving a limited but clear view of the sidewalk. The time-stamped footage provided investigators with a chilling timeline. It showed a man in a blue hooded sweatshirt lingering outside the shop at 1:41 a.m. His behavior was suspicious. He just stood there. Moments later, Jill Meagher walked into the frame. The police made a strategic decision. They isolated clear still images of this man from the CCTV and released them to the media on Tuesday, September 25th. They appealed to the public, asking for this man to either come forward or for anyone who recognized him to contact them. They were careful with their wording. He was someone they wanted to speak to, not necessarily a suspect. They needed to know what he saw. The investigation shifted from just finding a missing woman to searching for a specific individual, the last person to see Jill Meagher alive. While the public was analyzing the images of the man in the blue hoodie, homicide detectives were pursuing a different, more technical line of inquiry that would become crucial to the whole case. They were tracing the signal from Jill Meagher's mobile phone. Although the phone itself was missing and hadn't been used since her last call to her brother, it was still communicating silently with the network. Police obtained the records from the phone company and began mapping Jill's phone journey. The data revealed something critical. The phone remained stationary in the Brunswick area, checking in with local towers until about 4:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. This was more than 2 hours after she was last seen on CCTV. This detail was both confusing and sinister. It suggested that after the attack, the phone, and likely Jill, stayed in the local area for a significant time. Then, around 4:30 a.m., the phone signal started to move. It headed north, away from Brunswick, and the pattern of the pings indicated it was likely traveling along the Tullamarine Freeway, the major highway leading out of the city toward the airport and countryside. It strongly suggested that Jill had not just been attacked, she had been taken. Her abductor likely stayed in the area for hours, perhaps to avoid detection, before transporting her far away from the city under the early morning darkness. The police now had a direction and a rough time frame for the vehicle they should look for. The next step was significant data analysis. The detectives requested from the phone company a list of every mobile device that had used the same sequence of cell towers at the same times as Jill's phone. They were searching for a digital shadow, another phone traveling the same unusual path from Brunswick onto the Tullamarine Freeway at 4:30 in the morning. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but they had powerful technology and clear parameters to narrow it down. One name emerged from that data cross-reference. One phone, registered to a known individual, was following the same route at the same time. That name was Adrian Ernest Bailey. Bailey was already known to them. He was a 41-year-old man with a lengthy, violent criminal history. Most importantly, he was on parole for a series of horrific rapes. The digital evidence was compelling, but it was circumstantial. They needed to place him in the area that night. So they returned to the CCTV footage collected from around the city. Now that they had a name and a face, they could search for him specifically, and after some digging, they found him. They located footage of Bailey at the Quiet Man Irish pub in Flemington at 7:28 p.m. on that Friday night, miles away from where Jill would later be. He was there with his girlfriend. They had a heated argument, which witnesses described as stemming from his intense jealousy and possessiveness. Frustrated and upset, his girlfriend went to the bathroom and then left the pub in a taxi without him. Later, at 12:24 a.m., another camera outside the lounge bar captured Bailey pacing the sidewalk with his phone to his ear. He kept trying to call his girlfriend, who was now ignoring him. He was visibly agitated, angry, and rejected. The timeline was becoming clear. After being turned down, he returned to his home in Coburg. Then, crucially, CCTV from his street showed him leaving his house later, now wearing a blue hooded sweatshirt. He was heading towards Sydney Road, toward where he would encounter Jill. The digital and CCTV evidence were converging into a strong case. His phone was tracked leaving the city, and his car appeared on camera at a service station later on Saturday morning. On Monday, he was seen on CCTV at a tire shop, replacing all 4 tires on his vehicle, a highly suspicious act after someone has gone missing. The police had their prime suspect. They had the motive, a violent, angry man rejected by his girlfriend, wanting to reclaim power and control. They had the opportunity. He was in the area at the right time. And they had digital proof linking him to the victim's disappearance. All they needed now was the evidence to arrest him, where he obsessively cleaned the interior. By Thursday, September 27th, the investigation had built a strong case against Adrian Bailey. The digital trail was clear, the CCTV footage placed him at the scene, and his suspicious actions afterward strongly suggested guilt. The homicide squad had enough evidence to proceed. That afternoon, around 2:30 p.m., detectives arrived at his home in Coburg. They arrested Adrian Bailey without incident. He was taken to a police station for questioning, a process that would stretch on for 10 long hours. For most of that time, Bailey was uncooperative. He denied everything. He acted like a confused and concerned citizen. He claimed he had only heard about the Jill Meagher case from media coverage. He said he never met her, never saw her, and had nothing to do with her disappearance. While Bailey was in the interview room, another team of officers executed a search warrant at his home. They searched every room, drawer, and potential hiding place. The breakthrough came from a mundane source: the laundry. Bailey's girlfriend, who lived with him, was wholly unaware of the horror in their home. In the days following the crime, she had done what anyone would do. She had washed a load of clothes. While searching the washing machine, detectives found among the clean clothes was a tiny, rectangular piece of plastic and metal. It was the SIM card from Jill Meagher's phone. It was physical, undeniable proof linking Bailey directly to Jill. When detectives in the interview room were informed about the find, they confronted Bailey with it. The pretense of innocence fell apart. After nearly 10 hours of denial, faced with the SIM card, Adrian Bailey broke down and confessed. His story was a feeble attempt to reduce his responsibility. He claimed he had seen Jill on the street and had nicely spoken to her. He said she was friendly at first, but then suddenly turned nasty and flipped him off, which enraged him. This was a lie, an effort to blame the victim for his own violent actions. The truth was much simpler. He was a predator, and she was his prey. He followed her when she turned off the well-lit Sydney Road onto the darker, quieter Hope Street. There, in a laneway, he attacked her. He later coldly told police that he hadn't meant to hurt her, that he just wanted to rape her. He violently raped her and then strangled her to death. For more than half his life, he had been a violent sexual offender, but that night, his violence escalated to its ultimate conclusion. He became a murderer. But his confession didn't end there. He had to explain the phone's movement, the trip onto the Tullamarine freeway. He told them that after the attack, he left her body there in the laneway. He then walked back to his house, a short distance away, to get his car and a shovel. At 4:22 a.m., his car was captured on CCTV returning to the area. He loaded Jill's body into the trunk and began to drive. He traveled north for over 30 miles to a remote area near Gisborne South called Black Hill Road. Under the darkness of the early morning sky, he dug a shallow grave, a hole only about a foot deep, and buried her. After his confession, in the dead of the night, a convoy of police cars, with Adrian Bailey in the back of one, drove to Black Hill Road. Led by Bailey, they arrived at the site. Using shovels and their hands under floodlights, they carefully excavated the area. They found Jill Meagher's body, partially naked, discarded in the dirt. It was a heartbreaking end to the search. At around 2 a.m. on Friday, September 28, Adrian Bailey was formally charged with the rape and murder of Jill Meagher. The city, which had been holding its breath for 6 days, finally exhaled, but it was not a sigh of relief. It was a collective gasp of horror and grief. As Adrian Bailey was formally charged and placed in a cell, the public's horror transformed into intense rage. Details about his past quickly emerged in the media. He was not a random, first-time offender. The man who took Jill Meagher was a violent sexual predator with a long and brutal history. It seemed impossible that he had been walking free. The terrifying extent of Adrian Bailey's life of crime exposed a justice system that had failed to protect its citizens. His pattern of violence began shockingly early. At just 18 years old, he was already married, and his wife was pregnant. In a shocking act of betrayal and cruelty, he raped a 17-year-old girl who was a friend of his sister's, attacking her in his own home. This was not a one-time event. Within a year, he raped 2 more women. For these 3 violent crimes, the legal system handed him a 5-year prison sentence. However, he served only 22 months before being released on parole. Bailey had 2 more children with his first wife before they divorced in 1995. He remarried that same year and had 2 more children before yet another divorce. He managed to stay off the police radar for about 6 or 7 years, a break that may have misled parole boards and psychologists into believing he could be rehabilitated. But in 2000, his violent urges returned, stronger than before. He specifically targeted sex workers in the Street Kilda area, a group he later dismissed to police as worthless. Over 2 years, he raped 5 to 6 women. After raping them, he often displayed a bizarre and manipulative pattern. He would cry, apologizing profusely for what he had done, only to then rape them again. This cycle of violence and false remorse revealed a deeply disturbed and dangerous man who viewed his victims as objects for his own gratification. In 2002, he was finally caught and faced the consequences of his brutal actions. He received an 11-year prison sentence for 16 separate counts of rape against 5 different women. The judge described his actions as a campaign of rape. Yet, despite the severity of his crimes and clear evidence that he was a repeat, compulsive offender, he was released on parole in 2010 after serving only 8 years of his sentence. Just months before he encountered Jill Meagher, Bailey's violent nature resurfaced, this time in public. In March 2012, he brutally assaulted a man outside a cafe in Geelong. The attack was so violent that it broke the man's jaw and knocked him unconscious. For this assault, he received a 3-month prison sentence. However, he appealed the conviction. Because of that appeal, a critical administrative rule came into effect. His parole could not be automatically revoked until the appeal process was complete. This fact turned public grief into widespread, righteous anger. People were not just mourning a murder. They were facing the staggering negligence that allowed it to happen. The legal proceedings that followed were a formality, but necessary to provide a measure of justice. On April 5, 2013, Adrian Bailey stood in the Victorian Supreme Court and pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of Jill Meagher. There would be no trial, sparing Jill's family and the public the horror of hearing graphic details exploited in court. Justice Jeffrey Nettle sentenced Bailey to life in prison with a non-parole period of 35 years, meaning he would be 76 years old before he could even ask for freedom. Even this wasn't the end. In 2015, after 3 trials, he was convicted of 3 more violent rapes he committed against a Dutch backpacker and 2 sex workers before killing Jill. These victims, encouraged by the publicity of his conviction, finally saw their attacker held accountable. For these crimes, he received an additional 18 years. His total non-parole period was set at 43 years, later reduced on a technical appeal to 40 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2055, when he is 83 years old. But Jill Meagher's story is about much more than one man's imprisonment. It's about the powerful and immediate response of a community that refused to stay silent. The day after her body was found, around 30,000 people gathered in Brunswick. They walked the route Jill had taken that last night. It was not a loud or angry protest, but a silent, solemn, and powerful vigil. People carried candles, laid flowers, and stood together. This march was an outpouring of collective grief, but also a protest. It was a silent scream against violence towards women and a strong demand that those in power ensure this could never happen again. Public rage was directed squarely at the parole system. How could this have been allowed? A formal coroner's inquest was held, and its findings were damning. Coroner Ian Gray stated unequivocally that Jill's death was preventable. He found that a more rigorous, risk-averse approach by Community Correctional Services and the Adult Parole Board would have led to the cancellation of Bailey's parole. This official condemnation compelled the Victorian government to act. They launched a complete overhaul of the parole system. The reforms were sweeping and bear the legacy of this case. The presumption in favor of parole for serious offenders was removed. Parole was no longer an automatic right. It became a privilege that had to be earned. Violent and sexual offenders would now face the highest level of scrutiny. Most importantly, any new violent offense by a parolee would now lead to the immediate cancellation of their parole. These changes were made in Jill's name. They aimed to ensure that no other family would have to suffer a similar loss because a known predator was mistakenly deemed rehabilitated. Tom Meagher, throughout this unimaginable ordeal, became a powerful advocate for these changes and for a larger conversation about respect and violence against women. Jill's story is a permanent scar on Melbourne's heart. It reminds us of a vibrant life taken too soon. But it is also a story of how a community's love and anger can create lasting change, making the world a bit safer for others. I thank you all for being here and also for being a part of this community. We have come to the end of today's episode. Do well to like and feel free to leave your comments down below. I will be seeing you on our next case. Stay well and stay safe.